Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are strapping in for, well, a truly fascinating journey into theoretical science, pushing boundaries in biology, physics, and maybe even philosophy. We're focusing on the predicted biophysics of plasma life forms. These are complex, potentially self-aware entities made entirely of plasma, the fourth state of matter. We're really unpacking the dark plasma hypothesis, which was proposed by the independent researcher J. Alfred. Our goal today is to get into the nuts and bolts. How would these hypothetical creatures actually look, move, and maybe most intriguingly, how would they think?
That's right. The source material, J. Alfred's work, really digs into the physical nature of complex magnetic plasma that can, self-organize, and then it extrapolates from those properties what life might look like if it arose from that. We're charting a biology that operates on completely different rules than the carbon and water life we know.
Okay, let's start right there. Plasma life forms. Why is being made of plasma such a fundamental difference? What's the immediate consequence of being, well, born from superheated charged particles?
It really boils down to density. In most plasma states, the particles have incredibly high kinetic energy, and there's strong mutual repulsion between these charged particles. So the distances between them are just enormous, vastly greater than in a solid or a liquid. This inherently means a plasma body has very low density, very little actual mass, and almost negligible weight.
So even if it's huge, it weighs next to nothing. Low density, low weight.
Exactly. And probably the most startling implication of that extremely low density is that in their natural sort of resting state, these beings are what physicists call collisionless.
Collisionless, you mean like they can just pass right through each other without any resistance. That sounds less like a creature and more like, well, a ghost.
It does feel like science fiction, doesn't it? But it's grounded in the physics. Because their particles are so spread out, they can easily occupy the same volume of space and just interpenetrate. The implications are pretty profound. Physical barriers, solid walls, even, other similar life forms that might just cease to be meaningful obstacles.
But wait, what if they do want to interact? Or if they linger in the same space? Does anything happen then?
There's a nuance there. They apparently have the ability to increase their particle density. If they do that, they can become mildly or even fully collisional. So if two mildly collisional beings were to move through each other, the source material suggests it would feel something like moving through a temporary kind of viscous resistance, maybe like pushing through the surface tension of water.
So they can choose to interact physically, it just takes effort.
Precisely. They retain the option to interpenetrate, but the physical interaction becomes palpable if they increase their density. And what's also really fascinating is the state of the plasma itself. Complex plasma isn't just, a hot gas. It can behave like liquid crystals. This allows the life form, theoretically, to transition its body. It could shift from a more structured crystalline plasma solid state to a highly fluidic plasma liquid state.
Okay, let's tie this density shifting to location and weight. J. Alfred's hypothesis, it suggests these life forms live in specific layers within these theorized dark matter planets called dark Earths. Basically giant dark plasmaspheres.
That's the idea. And their density is entirely dependent on where they are within that sphere. A life form living deep near the core of a dark Earth might be extremely dense, maybe even denser than water. But the ones hypothesized to be coincident with our own atmosphere, they'd be incredibly tenuous, almost immaterial. The source material gives a really striking analogy for this. It suggests a man-sized plasma body floating near Earth's surface might only register about maybe 7 kilograms of weight, even if it looked fully formed.
7 kilograms? For something human-sized, that's incredible. So how do they actively control this radical change in density from ghost-like to, well, palpable? Is that like their version of flexing a muscle?
That's actually a perfect analogy. It's described as a physiological process achieved through magnetic compression. They generate rapid, pulsed electrical currents within their plasma bodies. These currents create transient but powerful magnetic fields. And these fields exert inward Lorentz forces, essentially squeezing the charged plasma radially, compressing it very quickly.
That sounds like it would take an astronomical amount of energy to fight against that outward thermal pressure of the plasma itself. Does J. Alfred's work address how they'd manage that power draw?
It implies a highly efficient internal system. It notes that the principle is actually analogous to how human scientists use lab equipment, specifically things called Z-pinch devices, to contain and compress plasma for fusion research. They have to increase the magnetic pressure extremely rapidly to overcome that opposing outward thermal pressure, which is caused by the energy injection itself. That's how they achieve contraction and therefore increase density.
All right, let's shift from the unseen physics to what they might actually look like. What's the default appearance for these ethereal beings?
Well, their natural stable form, especially under gravitational influence like here on Earth, is expected to be sort of a teardrop shape, or maybe an elongated ovoid. Think of the shape of a candle flame. If they were out in zero gravity space, the prediction is they'd assume a more perfect sphere. So generally, you're probably looking at orbs or ovoids as the baseline shape.
And we already established that their low particle density allows for incredible flexibility.
Absolutely. They're predicted to exhibit remarkable shape-shifting and scalability. They could potentially expand or contract to many times their baseline size just by altering the space between their constituent particles. This ability would allow them to generate temporary appendages or limbs, the sources call them pseudopods, kind of mimicking the motion and adaptability of a simple amoeba.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting for me. Light. You're saying they don't just passively reflect light like we do? How do they interact with the electromagnetic spectrum?
Right, it's quite dynamic. They do emit light internally through spontaneous emission, similar to how an aurora glows or maybe a fluorescent lamp works. But their interaction with ambient light, whether they appear shiny or dark or maybe even invisible, that's controlled by something called their internal plasma frequency. And this frequency is directly determined by their particle density.
So by changing their density, they change how they interact with light.
Exactly. By adjusting their density, they effectively act like a kind of smart window. They're capable of 4 distinct modes, depending on how their internal plasma frequency compares to the frequency of the incoming ambient light waves.
Okay, lay out those 4 modes for us. What's the first one?
Okay, mode 1. If their internal plasma frequency is higher than the frequency of the ambient light hitting them, they reflect that light. They'd look like a metallic, bright mirror. This is called the arc or glow mode. It's sort of like an invisibility cloak effect, but instead of vanishing, you'd see this bright, highly polished, maybe even distorted reflection bouncing off them.
Okay, bright and reflective. What if they lower their density so their plasma frequency drops below the ambient light frequency?
That triggers transparent mode. The light just passes right through them. They become essentially a transparent refractive lens. So they'd effectively disappear from view, though they might still bend the light slightly as it passes through, maybe creating a shimmering distortion in the air, like heat haze.
Right, so shiny or invisible. What about the Goldilocks zone? What if they manage a perfect match between their frequency and the light's frequency?
Ah, that's dark mode. When their plasma frequency precisely matches the ambient light frequency, you get resonant absorption. They absorb the energy from the light waves, and because they're absorbing rather than reflecting or transmitting, they appear dark, like a shadow.
Wow. So they can choose to be shiny, invisible, or a consuming shadow, all just by essentially flexing that density muscle.
That's the theoretical capability, yes. All controlled physiologically.
And what's even more fascinating, you mentioned their color and texture aren't just about light interaction, they're thermochromic.
Yes, exactly. Like liquid crystals, their color is predicted to change with fluctuations in their internal temperature and density. The sources, J. Alford's work, suggest that looking at a plasma life form could be like, well, like seeing a real-time functional magnetic resonance imaging scan of their mind projected directly onto their body.
So their appearance is their emotional state.
In a way, yes. Bright, vibrant colors might signify positive emotions, like joy or excitement. Darker hues, or maybe specific textures like striations, which are like bands, could indicate stress, concentration, or maybe even aggression. And their surface features are described in ways that mirror astronomical bodies, which make sense given their plasma. They might exhibit glowing coronas like an aura, or maybe rising spicules, which are jets of plasma shooting outwards. Or even granulations, like on the sun's surface, caused by internal convection cells. All these visual features tied to their internal state.
Incredible. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. How do these shape-shifting, glowing, potentially invisible bodies actually move around? How do they navigate their environment?
Well, probably their easiest method of travel is simply buoyancy. Since the dark Earth plasmasphere they supposedly inhabit is fluid-like, they can just change their overall body density to ascend or descend. If they want to rise, they decrease their density, become lighter than the surrounding plasma layer, and they float up. If they want to sink, they compress, become denser, and gravitate down to a layer of similar density.
Okay, simple enough, like a controlled balloon or submarine. But they can also engage in active propulsion, right? Not just floating.
Correct. They're predicted to have methods of mechanical movement. For instance, they might generate electric winds. These are basically blasts of neutral gas created by particle collisions within or near them to push themselves forward. Or they could potentially use jet propulsion, maybe sucking in surrounding plasma particles through a controlled vortex at one end and forcefully expelling them out the other side for thrust, kind of like how a squid moves.
And then there's the really exotic one, using the magnetic field itself. The sources call it their subway system.
Yes, that's electromagnetic movement. Because they are charged bodies living in a magnetized environment, they could temporarily alter the charge distribution across their own body. By doing this, they could allow themselves to be propelled along the existing magnetic field lines of the dark Earth. These lines, sometimes referred to as Birkeland currents, which are known to exist around planets like Earth, carrying huge electric currents, could act as a kind of high-speed transit system for them.
And how would that feel to the life form?
Well, since the movement is dictated by interaction with an invisible field, potentially controlled by internal thought processes that alter its charge, the source material suggests the life form might subjectively perceive it as moving by thought alone.
A thought becomes a command, the planetary field executes the movement. That's quite efficient. Okay, now communication. How do they talk to each other, especially across potentially vast distances within this plasmasphere?
For medium-range communication, the hypothesis suggests they use acoustic waves, but not sound as we typically think of it. Since they exist within a magnetized plasma medium, their thoughts and emotions, which are fundamentally electrochemical, or perhaps electromagnetic, neural activities would naturally vibrate the surrounding magnetic field lines. This generates what physicists call Alfvén waves. These are essentially vibrations propagating along the magnetic field lines. These vibrations create a kind of acoustic signature, or maybe a specific tone, that can be received and decoded by other resonant plasma bodies nearby. It's described as a nonverbal but definitely acoustic sharing of mental and emotional states.
An acoustic signature of thought itself, that's fascinating. And what about for longer distances?
Well, they are inherently electromagnetic bodies. So for long-range communication, the prediction is that they emit thought-modulated electromagnetic waves. They'd essentially act as highly sophisticated biological transmitters and receivers. They might utilize specialized plasma antenna structures embedded within their bodies. This would allow for direct thought transmission and reception over potentially immense distances. It is, in effect, a form of natural physics-based telepathy.
Okay, let's tackle the final and maybe the most mind-bending section, their cognition, their minds, and the relationship to reality itself. J. Alfred suggests that higher energy dark plasma life forms could exhibit vastly superior cognitive capacity. What's driving that predicted superintellect?
Yeah, this gets pretty abstract. The sources point to three main factors that could compound their intelligence, especially in higher energy states. First is the possibility of a higher dimensional neural architecture. If their consciousness operates using more spatial dimensions than our three, it allows for significantly more complex processing connections than our brains can manage. Second, their neural processes might increasingly rely on dark photons, not just standard electromagnetic interactions. This could make their thinking photonic-based, potentially operating at or near the speed of light, far faster than our chemical synapses. And third, the matter in these proposed higher energy sectors might behave in a quantum-like way, even at macroscopic scales. This could mean integrating quantum processing directly into their thought processes.
So higher dimensions, faster processing using light, and quantum computation, all built in.
Essentially, yes. They're described almost as living, networked biocomputers with capabilities far exceeding ours.
And this intense cognition, it leads directly into how they might shape their environment, right? The sources suggest the magnetized plasma environment of these dark Earths is highly malleable to thought.
Precisely. This is where the holographic reality concept comes in. Their thought-modulated electromagnetic waves, the same ones used for communication, could interact with the plasma environment in specific ways. They could excite these quasi-particles called plasmon polaritons. These are fascinating because they're described as being half plasma oscillation, half photon, sort of half matter, half light. And these excited plasmon polaritons can then, theoretically, transform or arrange themselves into matter-like holograms.
Plasmon polaritons. That sounds incredibly dense. Half matter, half light. Like it's a solid echo of a thought. Is that a fair way to put it?
That's actually a really good way to simplify it, yes. A tangible echo of thought. So when the life form focuses its energy and intent, it could literally reconstruct reality, or at least perceived reality, around itself using, according to J. Alfred, three potential methods of holography.
Okay, what's the first method?
The first is called plasmoid holography. In this model, tiny, discrete globules of plasma called plasmoids act like three-dimensional pixels, or voxels. By controlling the temperature and density of these individual plasmoids, the lifeform could make them acquire different colors, brightnesses, and even shapes, essentially generating detailed holograms right there in midair. Similar, perhaps, to how lasers can induce plasma points in labs to create images.
Okay, pixelated plasma. Then there's plasmonic holography. How does that differ?
This involves the interaction of their thought waves directly with denser layers of plasma in the surrounding environment, maybe deeper within the plasmasphere. When the frequency of the thought waves matches the natural resonant frequency of that dense plasma layer, it excites those plasmon polaritons we mentioned. These excited quasi-particles then reconstruct hyper-realistic virtual images or structures. And because the life form itself is proposed to be so light and ethereal, these holographic images might feel profoundly tangible, almost solid to them.
Right, interacting with the medium itself. And the final one, acoustic holography.
Yes. This uses those acoustic waves, the alpha wave vibrations we talked about for communication. These sound and vibration signatures radiating from the vibrating plasma bodies could exert a subtle but real mechanical force, a pressure, on the surrounding plasma medium. This pressure could potentially sculpt the plasma into three-dimensional images or patterns. It's described as being analogous to cymatics, where sound waves create visible geometric patterns in sand or water.
Okay, the truly profound implication here, then, isn't just that one individual can create a personal illusion or manifestation, but that a whole community could create a shared collective reality.
Absolutely. That's perhaps the most startling prediction. When a community of intelligent plasma life forms with similar intentions, beliefs, or focus direct their attention collectively, their individual thought-modulated waves would undergo constructive interference. This synchronized, amplified wave pattern could cause massive, coherent fluctuations in the surrounding plasma environment. The result, the manifestation of collective community holograms. These wouldn't just be fleeting images. They could be hyper-realistic, persistent landscapes, buildings, entire augmented realities that are physically manifested and maintained by the power of shared belief and focused thought.
So the consensus reality of the community literally dictates what is physically real, what is manifested and observed in their shared environment.
That's the core idea. And conversely, if observers within that environment are radiating conflicting thoughts or expectations, that could create destructive interference in the modulating waves. This could nullify the holographic signal. So the complex, manifested form, maybe another life form being observed, might suddenly revert to its simpler, default ovoid shape because the shared vision, the collective thought form that was holding its complex hologram together, has momentarily dissolved due to conflicting observation.
This has been a genuine deep dive into the, well, almost magical-seeming theoretical science proposed by J. Alfred. We've covered life forms that might pass through each other like ghosts, change density like flexing a muscle, appear or disappear by tuning their frequency to light, and communicate directly via thought using acoustic and electromagnetic signatures.
And perhaps the final, really provocative thought presented in the source material builds on that idea of observation. It suggests that a plasma lifeform's body could actually actively change its appearance to mirror an observer's deeply held expectations and belief systems. It could do this via a localized, plasmoid-induced hologram generated specifically for that observer.
In other words, the life form might adapt its appearance specifically to confirm the bias of whoever is looking at it. That certainly raises a fascinating question for you, the listener, to consider. If this theoretical dark earth exists, a place where the consensual reality of the majority literally dictates what gets holographically manifested, then the power of shared belief isn't just psychological anymore, is it? It becomes a fundamental biophysical law. Definitely something to mull over until our next deep dive.